Resistance is our unconscious unwillingness to tackle what it is we need to tackle in order for us to create the life that we desire. And ultimately, our resistance is our ego trying to protect us. And it does so in a way that isn't always beneficial to us. So it's about recognizing that although your resistance has good intentions at heart, you need to bring it into your awareness in order to overcome it. Now, resistance can show up both cognitively and emotionally. Cognitively, it's in the story that we tell ourselves. We maybe tell ourselves that we're just not capable of change, or this is just how we are. We might tell ourselves that conditions aren't perfect just yet, or that we're never going to be good enough. And again, these are all stories that are designed to protect us from failure, but ultimately protect us also from making the changes necessary to live the life that we really deserve to live. Resistance can also show up as a sense of entitlement. We tell ourselves a story of shouldn't have to do this, or I really should be able to X, Y, or Z. And again, it's this assumption that life should be easy and that things should be comfortable, that we should always be happy and that life should always be pleasurable. And frequently that isn't the case. Oftentimes the behaviours or the thinking processes that we need to discard are the ones that we are most attached to, the ones that we have acquired as a form of coping with life. And so when we try to challenge them, when we try to bring them into the spotlight, we tend to feel very uncomfortable. We tend to feel a little distressed, but that's normal and very much part of the process. Likewise, resistance shows up in an emotional way, and that's the anxiety we feel when we try and take away our coping mechanisms, or when we try and challenge some of our well-grooved behaviours. In order to counteract resistance, you have to first be aware of it. I mean, frequently the stories that we tell ourselves about the feelings that we're experiencing and why we shouldn't have to feel that way are very convincing. They feel very true, and consequently we tend to listen to them. We tend to assume that they are factual and accurate, as opposed to being able to observe them and see how they're actually holding us back. And the more we bring ourselves into the present, the more we come away from our conditioned self, the more we come away from the ego and into our heart and see things, see our thinking processes, see our emotional responses with compassion and curiosity, the more likely we are to notice our resistance and be able to counteract it. Frequently there is a decision to be made between short-term comfort and relief and pleasure and long-term meaning and fulfillment. And more often than not, we have a tendency to opt for the short-term dopamine hit, as opposed to seeing what it is that we want for our future selves, the person that we want to be. And the more we can have the foresight to recognize that the choices we make on a day-to-day basis are what are going to accumulate into the life that we create, the more likely we are to pick wisely. The more grounded and present we are, the more likely we are to make these wise choices. And that basically involves a practice of coming back to the self. We tend to live in our heads. We tend to be either future-based or ruminating about the past. And the more we can bring ourselves back into the equanimity of the present, the more likely we are to be engaged with our life exactly as it is, as opposed to resisting it and fighting against it. Because again, in order for you to be able to change, you have to accept the way things they actually are. And this can be really uncomfortable for so many people because they're convinced that they should be something different. They're convinced that as they are is inadequate, that it's just not enough. And that is just the ultimate form of self-rejection and self-abandonment. And it makes it very difficult for us to do any work that is meaningful and purposeful. The more willing we are to be uncomfortable, the more willing we are to be able to sit with anxiety and uncomfortable emotions, the more likely we are to be able to accept who it is that we are and to work with that person, to work with the self, as opposed to fighting against it. It's also important that we make things manageable for ourselves. We tend to overwhelm ourselves when it comes to implementing change or when it comes to working on our mental and emotional well-being. particularly when it comes to letting go of some of the coping mechanisms that we've acquired. We assume it has to be all or nothing. We assume when we start off that this is how it's going to be forever. We don't give ourselves permission to have setbacks and failures. We have a tendency to make plans for the next decade as opposed to just trying to get through today, because any sort of change, any sort of letting go of coping mechanisms, any sort of journey of self-awareness is challenging, and it can be so painful and so demanding, but so refreshing and enlightening at the same time. So it's about being really compassionate with yourself and just working through each breath, working through each moment, and working through each day, as opposed to bouncing off into some future version of yourself and losing track of what's actually important, and that is where you are right now. Working through our resistance and working with our coping mechanisms, working with our ego, working with our dark side, and working with some of the aspects of ourselves that we would prefer to see different. It's the work of a lifetime, creating awareness, creating knowledge of the self that allows you to be the person that you can ultimately be, and find a way to serve others, to show up to your life, as opposed to just getting through each day and being completely numbed out, being completely automated. This allows you to be alive, to feel this vitality in your days, even when things aren't exactly as you would like them to be. If you would like to find out how you can build a greater sense of self-acceptance and self-awareness, if you would like assistance in challenging some of the resistance that you're coming up against, no matter how subtle it is, get in touch with me on the website. It's fundamentals.ie.